What if the most powerful move you could make today was to say nothing, do nothing, react to nothing, and in that silence, become unstoppable? Confidence is not loud. Confidence does not rush. Confidence does not defend itself. Confidence is quiet because it knows. And the truth is, most people aren't struggling with failure. They're struggling with noise. Noise from opinions. Noise from expectations. Noise from fear. So today, we talk about 7 rules, not to look confident, but to become dangerously confident. Most people think confidence is about being louder, faster, stronger, more visible, more impressive, more admired. But real confidence does not begin in the spotlight. It begins in the silence, because silence is where clarity lives, and clarity is where confidence is born. We live in a world full of noise, opinions, judgments, expectations, trends, comparisons. And when you allow that noise to guide your decisions, you don't build confidence, you borrow it. And borrowed confidence always expires the moment approval disappears, which is why so many people feel strong in a crowd but weak alone. Clarity, on the other hand, is quiet. It doesn't shout. It doesn't rush. It doesn't panic. It simply knows. And when you know who you are, what you stand for, and where you are going, you stop reacting to every voice around you and start responding only to the one within you. Confidence is not built by proving others wrong. It is built by proving yourself consistent. When you have clarity, criticism becomes information, not injury. When you have clarity, doubt becomes fuel, not friction. When you have clarity, delay becomes preparation, not punishment. And clarity doesn't arrive magically. It is created through reflection, discipline, and the courage to sit with your own thoughts long enough to understand them instead of escaping them through distraction, entertainment, validation, or constant movement. Here's the truth most people avoid. You cannot be confident about a life you haven't consciously chosen. If you don't decide what matters, the world will decide for you. If you don't define success, society will define it for you. If you don't choose your direction, momentum will choose it for you. And momentum without intention is not progress, it's drift. Clarity requires courage. The courage to disappoint others in order to not disappoint yourself. The courage to walk away from paths that look successful but feel empty. The courage to say no to good things so you can say yes to the right things. And the courage to trust that the quiet voice inside you knows more than the loud voices outside you ever will. And once you have clarity, confidence becomes inevitable. Not because life becomes easier, but because you become steadier. And when you are steady, storms no longer shake you. Opinions no longer move you. Setbacks no longer stop you. And delays no longer define you. Because you are no longer chasing approval, attention, or acceptance. You are walking in alignment. And alignment is power. And power is calm. And calm is dangerous in a world addicted to chaos. And that is why the most confident people don't announce themselves. They arrive, they observe, they choose, they act, they grow, they evolve, they build, they fall, they rise, they refine, they repeat, and they continue moving forward quietly, steadily, relentlessly, not because they are trying to be seen, but because they are committed to becoming. And becoming never ends, because growth never ends, because purpose never ends, because clarity deepens with time and experience and reflection and discipline and courage and patience and resilience and humility and learning and unlearning and relearning and walking and waiting and trusting and building and breaking and rebuilding and listening and leading and serving and choosing and becoming and becoming and becoming. Most people believe power looks like control over others, but real power is control over yourself. And the fastest way to measure your power is not by what you say, what you own, or what you achieve, but by how you respond when things don't go your way. Because anyone can be calm when life is easy. Anyone can be confident when they're winning. Anyone can feel strong when they're praised. But true confidence is revealed in pressure, in criticism, in rejection, in delay, in disrespect, in disappointment. Because pressure does not create character, it reveals it. Every time you react emotionally, you surrender authority. Every time you pause intentionally, you reclaim it. Reaction is instinct. Response is intelligence. Reaction is ego. Response is mastery. When someone disrespects you and you immediately retaliate, you don't defend your dignity, you abandon it. When someone doubts you and you immediately explain yourself, you don't prove your worth, you question it. When someone provokes you and you immediately react, you don't show strength, you reveal sensitivity. Silence, however, is not weakness. Silence is not fear. Silence is not surrender. Silence is strategy. Silence gives you space. Space gives you clarity. Clarity gives you control. And control gives you confidence. The most dangerous person in any room is not the loudest one. It's the calmest one, because calm is not passive. Calm is powerful. Calm is deliberate. Calm is disciplined. Calm is chosen. Calm is trained. Calm is built in moments when you wanted to react, but chose to breathe instead. When you wanted to argue, but chose to listen instead. When you wanted to prove yourself, but chose to improve yourself instead. Every moment you do not react, you grow. You grow in awareness. You grow in maturity. You grow in strength. And growth compounds. Because when you stop reacting, you start leading. Leading your emotions, leading your thoughts, leading your energy, leading your time, leading your direction, leading your future. And when you lead yourself, others can no longer control you, manipulate you, distract you, rush you, pressure you, provoke you, or define you. Because the only thing that has authority over your state of mind is your own discipline. And discipline is freedom. Freedom from impulsiveness. Freedom from validation. Freedom from emotional dependency. Freedom from regret. And freedom creates confidence. Not confidence that shouts. Not confidence that proves. Not confidence that performs. But confidence that stands. And standing does not require movement. It requires grounding. And grounding requires awareness. And awareness requires stillness. And stillness requires courage. Because it takes courage to pause in a world that demands reaction. To breathe in a culture addicted to speed. To listen in a society obsessed with noise. To stay calm when everything inside you wants to explode. To stay centered when everything around you wants to collapse. To stay disciplined when everything feels unfair. To stay patient when everything feels urgent. To stay focused when everything feels distracting. To stay committed when everything feels uncertain. To stay steady when everything feels unstable. To stay true when everything feels tempting. To stay humble when everything feels rewarding. To stay strong when everything feels heavy. To stay soft when everything feels hard. To stay kind when everything feels cruel. To stay present when everything feels overwhelming. To stay intentional when everything feels accidental. To stay grounded when everything feels chaotic. To stay clear when everything feels confusing. To stay calm when everything feels threatening. To stay composed when everything feels personal. To stay silent when everything feels loud. To stay still when everything feels rushed. To stay steady when everything feels shaky. To stay confident when everything feels uncertain. To stay you when everything tries to change you. And in that staying, in that choosing, in that discipline, in that silence, you become powerful, and power becomes calm, and calm becomes confidence, and confidence becomes dangerous, and dangerous becomes unstoppable, and unstoppable becomes a way of life, and a way of life becomes a mindset, and a mindset becomes a habit, and a habit becomes a character, and a character becomes a destiny, and a destiny becomes a legacy, and a legacy becomes influence, and influence becomes impact, and impact becomes meaning, and meaning becomes purpose, and purpose becomes fulfillment, and fulfillment becomes peace, and peace becomes strength, and strength becomes stillness, and stillness becomes mastery, and mastery becomes freedom, and freedom becomes confidence, and confidence becomes you. And you become more than you were. And more than you were becomes more than you are. And more than you are becomes more than you ever imagined. And more than you ever imagined becomes more than you ever needed. And more than you ever needed becomes enough. And enough becomes everything. And everything becomes quiet. And quiet becomes powerful. And powerful becomes calm. And calm becomes clarity. And clarity becomes confidence. And confidence becomes the foundation upon which you build the rest of your life. And the rest of your life becomes the story you tell. And the story you tell becomes the example you leave. And the example you leave becomes the message the world remembers. And the message the world remembers becomes the reason someone else believes. And belief becomes action. And action becomes change. And change becomes growth. And growth becomes becoming. And becoming becomes endless. We live in a world that mistakes motion for progress, noise for power, and reaction for relevance. But the truth is, the strongest people are not the busiest, the loudest, or the most visible. They are the most grounded, because grounding creates stability, and stability creates strength. Stillness is not laziness. Stillness is not weakness. Stillness is not inaction. Stillness is intention. It is the space between impulse and decision. It is the pause between stimulus and response. It is the moment where power is either lost or claimed. Most people run from stillness because stillness forces reflection, and reflection forces honesty, and honesty forces responsibility, and responsibility forces change, and change is uncomfortable. So instead of sitting with their thoughts, they drown them in noise, distraction, entertainment, urgency, deadlines, notifications, opinions, comparisons, and constant motion, not realizing that motion without direction is not progress, it's escape. Stillness, on the other hand, is not escape, it is alignment. In stillness, you hear your values. In stillness, you clarify your vision. In stillness, you recognize your patterns. In stillness, you redefine your priorities. And once your priorities are clear, your confidence becomes unshakable because you are no longer reacting to the world. You are responding from within. A calm mind sees clearly. A clear mind chooses wisely. A wise choice builds strength. And strength creates confidence. Stillness trains your nervous system to stop treating every challenge as a threat and start treating it as information. To stop seeing every delay as rejection and start seeing it as preparation. To stop interpreting every obstacle as defeat and start recognizing it as design. Because not everything that blocks your path is meant to stop you. Some things are meant to shape you. When you practice stillness, you stop chasing certainty and start trusting direction. You stop demanding answers and start developing understanding. You stop forcing outcomes and start focusing on inputs. And inputs compound. Your thoughts become beliefs. Your beliefs become behaviors. Your behaviors become habits. Your habits become character. Your character becomes destiny. And destiny is not decided by luck. It is shaped by consistency. And consistency is sustained by clarity. And clarity is strengthened by stillness. Stillness teaches you to sit with discomfort without escaping it. To feel emotion without being controlled by it, to experience pressure without collapsing under it, to face uncertainty without rushing into certainty, to encounter fear without obeying it, to hear doubt without surrendering to it, to receive criticism without internalizing it, to observe conflict without absorbing it, to witness chaos without becoming it. And when you can remain calm in chaos, you become the calm. And when you become the calm, you become the standard. And when you become the standard, you become the leader, not because you command attention, but because you create stability. People do not follow noise. They follow clarity. They follow consistency. They follow calm. Stillness allows you to move slower than your emotions, but faster than your fear. Slower than your impulses, but faster than your doubts. Slower than your anxiety, but faster than your excuses, slower than your reactions, but faster than your regrets. And in that space, Between impulse and intention lies your power. Power not to dominate, but to direct. Power not to impress, but to influence. Power not to react, but to respond. And response is where mastery lives. Because mastery is not control over the world. It is control over yourself. And self-control begins with self-awareness. And self-awareness begins with stillness. And stillness begins with the courage to stop. And stopping begins with the decision to listen. And listening begins with the willingness to be quiet. And being quiet begins with the strength to face what you hear. And facing what you hear begins with honesty. And honesty begins with humility. And humility begins with growth. And growth begins with discipline. And discipline begins with commitment. And commitment begins with purpose. And purpose begins with clarity. And clarity begins with stillness. And stillness becomes strength. And strength becomes confidence. And confidence becomes calm. And calm becomes influence. And influence becomes leadership. And leadership becomes impact. And impact becomes meaning. And meaning becomes fulfillment. And fulfillment becomes peace. And peace becomes power. And power becomes stillness again. And stillness becomes endless. Pressure is temporary. Purpose is permanent. Pressure comes from deadlines, expectations, competition, comparison, fear, uncertainty, responsibility, responsibility, responsibility. But purpose comes from within, and what comes from within cannot be taken by what happens around you. Most people collapse under pressure not because they are weak, but because they are unclear, because when you don't know why you're doing something, every obstacle feels personal, every delay feels like failure, every criticism feels like rejection, and every challenge feels like a signal to quit. But when you know your purpose, pressure becomes proof, not punishment. Purpose does not remove difficulty. It gives difficulty meaning, and meaning changes everything. When work feels heavy, purpose makes it worthwhile. When progress feels slow, purpose makes it bearable. When results feel distant, purpose makes it sustainable. Without purpose, people seek relief. With purpose, people seek growth. Relief asks, how do I escape this? Growth asks, what is this teaching me? And the question you ask determines the life you live. Purpose is not something you find. It is something you decide. You decide what matters. You decide what you stand for. You decide what you will not compromise. And once those decisions are made, pressure loses its power over you. Because pressure can push you, but it cannot move you. Only purpose can do that. Pressure shouts. Purpose whispers. And the whisper outlasts the shout. Pressure demands immediate comfort. Purpose demands long-term commitment. Pressure asks, what feels good now? Purpose asks, what builds the future? And confidence is born when your actions answer the second question consistently. Purpose gives you patience. Purpose gives you resilience. Purpose gives you perspective. It reminds you that setbacks are not stops. They are setups. That obstacles are not endings. They are instructions. That delays are not denials. They are development. Purpose turns pressure into preparation. Because when you know why you started, you don't quit when it gets hard. You adjust, you learn, you refine, you grow, you evolve, you continue, you persist, you rebuild, you recommit, you recommence, you reimagine, you realign, you restore, you rise again. Not because it's easy, but because it matters. And what matters fuels endurance. Endurance fuels consistency. Consistency fuels mastery. Mastery fuels confidence. And confidence fuels calm. Calm fuels clarity. Clarity fuels decision. Decision fuels direction. And direction fuels destiny. Purpose is not about achieving more. It's about becoming more. Becoming more patient. Becoming more disciplined. Becoming more intentional. Becoming more courageous. Becoming more grounded. Becoming more aligned. And alignment is strength. Strength does not shout, it stands. It stands when misunderstood. It stands when unrecognized. It stands when unrewarded. It stands when uncomfortable. It stands when uncertain. Because purpose is not fueled by applause. It is fueled by conviction. Conviction does not need permission. Conviction does not need validation. Conviction does not need approval. Conviction needs commitment. And commitment transforms pressure into progress. Because progress is not the absence of difficulty, it is the presence of direction. And direction keeps you moving when motivation disappears, when emotions fluctuate, when circumstances shift, when plans fail, when people leave, when results delay, when outcomes change, when paths close, when doors lock, when windows seem unreachable, when walls feel permanent, when ceilings feel heavy, when floors feel unstable, when foundations feel uncertain, when faith feels fragile, when hope feels distant, when energy feels low, when confidence feels shaken, when strength feels limited, when clarity feels blurred, when purpose feels questioned. And yet, you continue because you remember why you started, and remembering why you started reminds you who you are, and remembering who you are reminds you what you stand for, and remembering what you stand for reminds you what you're building, and remembering what you're building reminds you what matters, and remembering what matters reminds you why pressure cannot stop you, and remembering why pressure cannot stop you reminds you that purpose outlasts pressure, and pressure fades, and purpose remains, and remains becomes resilience, and resilience becomes endurance, and endurance becomes strength, and strength becomes confidence, and confidence becomes calm, and calm becomes clarity, and clarity becomes direction, and direction becomes destiny, and destiny becomes legacy, and legacy becomes meaning, and meaning becomes fulfillment, and fulfillment becomes peace, and peace becomes power, and power becomes purpose again, and purpose becomes endless. Most people are busy trying to prove they are enough, enough smart, enough strong, enough successful, enough worthy. But the most confident people are not trying to prove anything at all, because confidence is not something you display, it is something you live. Proof seeks permission. Embodiment requires none. When you try to prove yourself, you look outward. When you embody your values, you move inward. And inward is where consistency lives. And consistency is where credibility is built. And credibility is where confidence is formed, not through speeches, not through posts, not through performances, but through patterns. Patterns of behavior, patterns of discipline, patterns of integrity, patterns of effort, patterns of patience, patterns of resilience, patterns of courage, patterns of humility, patterns of growth. People who lack confidence talk about what they will do. People who embody confidence quietly do it. They don't announce their discipline, they practice it. They don't declare their integrity, they demonstrate it. They don't broadcast their growth, they become it. Because confidence is not a statement, it is a standard. A standard you hold when no one is watching. A standard you keep when no one is clapping. A standard you protect when no one is praising. Embodiment is alignment between who you say you are and how you actually live. And alignment is powerful because it removes friction, and friction drains energy, and drained energy weakens focus, and weakened focus weakens discipline, and weakened discipline weakens confidence, and weakened confidence weakens identity. But when you embody your values, energy flows, focus sharpens, discipline strengthens, confidence stabilizes, identity solidifies. And once your identity is solid, you stop performing, you start being. Being present, being patient, being consistent, being courageous, being disciplined, being intentional, being grounded, being calm, being resilient, being aligned. And alignment is dangerous, not to others, but to limitation, to doubt, to fear, to insecurity, to hesitation, to excuses, to distraction, to procrastination, to comparison, to validation, to dependency, to approval, to noise, to chaos. Because when you embody who you are becoming, you no longer need to explain who you are. Explanation is for confusion. Embodiment is for clarity. And clarity creates calm. Calm creates confidence. Confidence creates influence. Influence creates impact. But impact does not come from trying to be seen. It comes from trying to be useful, and usefulness comes from service, and service comes from purpose, and purpose comes from values, and values come from identity, and identity comes from consistency, and consistency comes from discipline, and discipline comes from commitment, and commitment comes from clarity, and clarity comes from reflection, and reflection comes from stillness, and stillness comes from courage, and courage comes from belief, and belief comes from experience, and experience comes from action, and action comes from decision, and decision comes from responsibility, and responsibility comes from ownership, and ownership comes from maturity, and maturity comes from growth, and growth comes from discomfort, and discomfort comes from challenge, and challenge comes from pressure, and pressure comes from purpose, and purpose comes from meaning, and meaning comes from contribution, and contribution comes from embodiment. The most confident people are not loud. They are consistent. They are not flashy. They are faithful. They are not reactive. They are rooted. They don't chase attention. Attention finds them. They don't seek validation. Validation becomes irrelevant. They don't demand respect. Respect becomes natural. Because respect is not requested. It is recognized. And recognition does not come from words. It comes from weight. The weight of your character, the weight of your habits, the weight of your choices, the weight of your discipline, the weight of your integrity, the weight of your patience, the weight of your humility, the weight of your resilience, the weight of your consistency, the weight of your commitment, the weight of your purpose, the weight of your alignment, the weight of your embodiment. And embodiment is the quiet power of becoming who you said you would be before anyone was watching, and continuing to become when no one is watching, and continuing when no one cares, and continuing when no one notices, and continuing when no one applauds, and continuing when no one understands, and continuing when no one supports, and continuing when no one believes, and continuing when no one remembers, and continuing when no one acknowledges, and continuing when no one celebrates, and continuing when no one sees, and continuing when no one hears, and continuing when no one speaks, and continuing when no one explains, and continuing when no one proves, and continuing when no one demands, and continuing when no one expects, and continuing when no one predicts, and continuing when no one anticipates, and continuing when no one imagines, and continuing when no one dreams, and continuing when no one dares, and continuing when no one tries, and continuing when no one starts, and continuing when no one finishes, and continuing when no one ends. Because embodiment has no end, and confidence has no finish, and growth has no ceiling, and becoming has no boundary, and purpose has no limit, and alignment has no expiration, and meaning has no conclusion, and influence has no edge, and impact has no border, and legacy has no deadline, and identity has no final version, and character has no last chapter, and the journey has no last step, and the story has no final page, and the path has no final turn, and the climb has no final peak, and the becoming has no final form, and the confidence has no ending, and the embodiment has no ending, and the becoming has no ending, and the becoming has no ending.